name is Simon. My name is Simon Agwale. I'm chair of vaccine technologies for AVMI. This morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, we will be talking about cGMP manufacturing facility design and build, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Stephen Praissman, who is a healthcare professional with over 40 years of diverse experience as a pharmaceutical regulatory affairs professional, pharmaceutical manufacturing expert, pharmaceutical process development scientist, and as a pharmacist on a part-time basis. His areas of expertise include project management, pharmaceutical manufacturing, new plant startups, technology transfer, and patient and student education. He has a bachelor's degree in pharmacy, a master's in public health, and training in mapping and geographic information systems. He is a licensed pharmacist in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, in the United States. He has had extensive project engagements in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. So Mr. Praissman is going to talk to us about this very important topic for 40 minutes. And then we will have 15 to 20 minutes to take your questions. And then Mr. Praissman will be very happy to answer them. So if you have any question, you can send them to the chat room, and we'll read your questions to Mr. Praissman, and he will respond accordingly. So over to you, Mr. Praissman.
Hi, good morning from Phoenix, Arizona. It's the start of another warm and sunny day. I've been asked to give two presentations that are somehow linked together. One is on GMP, good manufacturing practices, and the other one is on facility design with considerations given to GMP. Each of these presentations is going to be extremely brief and extremely high level, 20 minutes each. I've been asked to condense the whole working knowledge of GMP and facility design into 20 minutes each. But as I was told, these are introductory presentations, and as we move along, and if there's sufficient interest, we could have some more comprehensive and interactive presentations as we go. So I've had some technical difficulty sharing my screen, so Melissa is going to assist me remotely. And Melissa, if you would please put on the first one, the cGMP. She's going to share her screen with the presentation I provided. Let's see if it shows up.
Okay, I'm loading it now. Okay, let me know if you can see it.
Perfect. Perhaps if you can put it into there, but yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, so this is this 20-minute presentation, and it's going to be very high level. It's going to talk about good manufacturing practices. Next, please. Okay, what's the purpose of GMP? To ensure that drug products possess the identity, strength, quality, and purity that they purport to be. Next, please. What are GMPs? They're our general regulations. They're a way of life. They're a plan for the business to conduct it in the proper fashion. Next, please. Why are they important? Next. They guide every aspect of our manufacturing. Next. They help ensure the identity, strength, quality, and purity of the drug. Next, please. They're the lifeblood of the company. Without GMP, you don't have a company. And the failure to follow them may lead to statutory regulatory, or business sanctions upon your firm. Next, please. Okay, the GMPs aren't prescriptive in terms of telling you exactly what to do. They contain broad objectives. They minimize how-to specifics. They're flexible, and they allow new technologies to be implemented. Next, please. Okay, what are 10 basic principles of GMP? And this is the big takeaway. Melissa's got copies of these slides, so she'll be able to share them with you after the presentation. And if you are interested in having a copy, please email her. Number one, GMPs, they assure personnel are capable and qualified to perform the assigned duties. They are trained to do the job that they're doing. Number two, we assure that ingredients used in the manufacturing have their expected qualities. Number three, GMPs also require that process validation is performed to ensure that procedures used in the manufacturing will consistently result in product with what is expected. Next, please. Okay, we also want to ensure that the environment, the facilities, the equipment is suitable for its intended purpose. That's what GMPs are about. And we also want to confirm that finished products have its purported characteristics with product testing involved, effective quality control checks, and a combination of both. Next, please. Okay, we want to make sure that the finished product maintains its potency and characteristics until its labeled expiration date. Processes are always conducted under control. And we want to make sure that product contamination, cross-contamination, and mix-ups don't happen. That's one of the aspects of GMP. In addition, GMPs prescribe that adequate records and procedures for thorough investigation of failures, and that we want to separate functions and decisions of production and quality control. These are the 10 basic tenets of GMP. Okay, next, please. Okay, I'm going to talk specifically about how GMP relates to the United States. The WHO, the European agencies, and other regulatory agencies are pretty similar. The main differences between them are in record keeping, what is needed and how long records need to be maintained. But I'm going to speak mostly on this. Now, according to the US law, the 21 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulation, parts 210 and 211, which are available through the FDA website and through Google, state that the failure to comply with any regulation in the manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding of a drug shall render such drug to be adulterated. And as well, the person responsible for this failure is subject to regulatory action. Next, please. Okay, and subject to regulatory action may go as far as prison time for the corporate chief executive officer if it's a willing failure to follow GMP. There's 11 sections to 21 Code of Federal Regulations 211, and they're delineated with alphas. As you see, general provisions, organization, building and facilities, equipment. Next, please. Control, production, packaging, holding and distribution. Next, please. Laboratory, records, and returned and salvaged drug products. Next, please. Okay, we're just going to talk very briefly about each of the parts. Subpart B talks about personnel, which states that appropriate education, training, and experience must be provided for the person to perform the assigned functions. The person who does the job must be trained to do the job. The person must be trained in GMP as well as the specific job functions. This training must be offered to the individual by qualified personnel on a frequent and continuing basis. This training must also be documented in a permanent record that is available for inspection by the regulatory agencies. And it also states that you must have enough qualified personnel to perform and supervise each operation of the manufacturer. There is no excuse when a regulatory agency inspection comes in and you say, well, we didn't have enough people. The rules state you must have enough people to do the job. Next, please. Okay, how about the building and facilities that we use? Next, please. Okay, they must be of suitable size, construction, and location to facilitate cleaning, maintenance, and proper operations. They must also be large enough to allow for adequate placement and orderly placement of equipment and material to prevent mix-ups and contaminations. They also must be designed and laid out to have a good flow of people and materials to prevent contamination. Next, please. Okay. Not just bricks and mortar make the building, but they must have adequate lighting and ventilation. They must have adequate control over air pressure and to prevent microorganisms, dust, humidity excursions, and temperature excursions when appropriate. They must also have air filtration systems to the production areas to prevent cross-contamination and to also provide for the necessary temperature and humidity controls to make sure that the manufacturing operation is not compromised. Next, please. Okay. In addition to having a proper brick and mortar and interior infrastructure, they must be maintained in clean sanitary conditions and a good state of repair. Everything that we've talked about in GMP also needs written procedures assigning responsibilities for the sanitation, including schedules, methods, equipment, and materials for cleaning. Next, please. Okay, how about the equipment we use in our manufacturing operation? Next, please. Okay, the equipment we use must be of the appropriate design, size, and location to facilitate the operation, cleaning, and maintenance. They must be constructed of materials that don't react to the product, don't add to the product, and don't absorb the product. And they must be designed to prevent product from contact with lubricants and coolants. Next, please. Okay, how about the materials we use in the operation? Components, closures, and containers. Okay, there again, you see this written procedures describing in detail the receipt, identification, storage, handling, sampling, testing must be provided and kept in a state of update. Materials must be handled and stored in a manner to prevent contamination. All your materials must be stored off the floor and space to permit cleaning and inspection and to prevent them from being mixed up. Next, please. Excuse me. What about procedures and process controls? Next, please. Okay. One of the important elements of GMP is having written procedures. Written procedures for production and process control need to be designed to ensure that the drug products have the identity, strength, quality, and purity that they're purported to have. Written SOPs, standard operating procedures, and changes will be drafted, reviewed, and approved by appropriate units within the operations. And finally, the last approval is done by the quality unit. Next, please. Okay. There again, that magic word, written procedures for sampling and testing of in-process materials and drug products. Written procedures must be maintained and in use for appropriate sampling of materials to ensure that the batch is manufactured according to the regulations and according to the submission. Next, please. How about packaging and labeling? Okay, we've made the product. Now, what do we do with it? We have to put it in some kind of container. Okay, section 211.122 calls for material examination and usage. There again, written procedures must be available to describe in detail the receipt, identification, and testing of labeling and packaging materials. Labeling and packaging materials must be sampled, examined, and tested upon receipt and before use in packaging and labeling. Material will be approved or rejected based on tests and examinations. We must maintain records for the receipt testing and acceptance. And obsolete and outdated labeling is not to be retained in inventory. It is to be destroyed. We do, however, need to retain samples of this for our records. Next, please. Okay, how about warehouse? Okay, next, please. Okay, there again, that word, those two words crop up, written procedures. Written procedures must be available describing the warehousing of our products, our raw materials, our in-process goods, and our finished product. And after our product is manufactured, before it's released, it must be quarantined. Written procedures must be available that describe the quarantining facility. We must maintain our materials under appropriate conditions of temperature, humidity, and light so that the drug product is not affected. Next, please. Okay, how about the quality control laboratory? Okay, next, please. All right, this is covered under subpart I in the CFR 211.160. Okay, we must have scientifically sound specifications, standards, and testing procedures to assure conformance to appropriate standards. These procedures, as written, must include changes, and they must be drafted by appropriate individuals and reviewed and approved by the quality control unit. Next, please. Okay, general requirements. All of our instruments must have written procedures that detail how we maintain them and how we calibrate them, including the frequency and the personnel that are responsible for this calibration and maintenance. Next, please. Okay. How about our records and reports? Next, please. Okay. We must maintain all of our records and reports in their original form. Sometimes, because of the volume of the material, we cannot retain them in our primary building. So we can, however, make a photocopy or a microfilm or a digital copy and keep that locally, but the original copies must be kept in some kind of safe, secure archive. Okay, we must also do an annual product review for each product to evaluate the quality of the product and how it compares to materials that were produced in prior years. Okay, these annual product reviews look at product specifications, our manufacturing, our control procedures, and also any kind of deviations and investigations. Next, please. Okay, our 211.182 talks about equipment cleaning, and within that, it describes equipment logs, our procedures for cleaning, and our frequency of cleaning, and who is required to do the cleaning. Next, please. Okay, batch production and control records. Each batch we make must have its own individual record, and that is used to document what has all the steps that are performed during it, and it also includes all of the significant data captures that are done during manufacture. Next, please. Okay. All right. Next, please. Okay. After each batch is produced and all the documentation is performed, this production record and all of the ancillary records are reviewed by the quality unit to ensure compliance with written procedures. This production record review must be performed before the product is released. Next, please. Okay. And then within this product record review, any investigations are also reviewed. These investigations include conclusions and any follow-up prescribed. Next, please. Okay, in summary, the GMPs are the minimum requirements. Drug GMPs are unique in the sense that failure to comply renders the product adulterated. As I said, GMPs are umbrella regulations, and they apply to all finished dosage forms and the numerous processes that are needed to create these finished dosage forms. Next, please. Okay, this is just a summary of all the things involved in GMP principles. This links in with what was stated at the very beginning. Qualified and trained people perform the job. Procedures are followed. Everything is documented. Cleanliness of the facility and the equipment is required. The facility design feeds into GMP. Maintenance, validation, written records, and then a constant vigilance for following your written procedures. Next, please. Okay, these are 10 rules that you can look at later or do a screenshot and look at now. Next, please. Okay, the WHO pre-qualification program is something that you're probably very familiar with. It is the review and approval process that is required for drug substances and drug products to be used within the WHO program. And WHO follows a GMP program that is very much like what I described. And you can get the exact wording of their program on their website. Next, please. I think that may be it. Okay, so this was a quick run through of GMP. It was not at all comprehensive. I'm sure you've got many questions, And we'll entertain a few questions at the end of the next presentation. Okay. Let's load up the next presentation, which is also a quick overview. That's on facilities design. This material came from the WHO, and I've condensed it for 20 minutes, and it's you just can't build buildings with 20 minutes of information, so bear that in mind. Okay, design and construction of a pharmaceutical facility. And this is general in scope. It doesn't really relate to solid dosage forms or injectables specifically. It's just a general overview. So next, please, Melissa. Okay, this is just a permission from WHO to use this material because I took a lot of their pictures and so forth. Next, please. Okay, design and construction of a pharmaceutical facility must follow GMP. Okay, next, please. Okay, good manufacturing practices are the basis for the pre-qualification program. Next, please. Okay, basic principles of GMP involve premises. Next. Okay. Okay, important aspects. I guess you have to. Okay, let's just keep pressing next till we get a full screen. There, okay. Key elements to keep in mind for different dosage forms and different products. The location of the facility, its design, its construction, its ability to adapt to either business or regulatory needs, and the maintenance of it. Next, please. Okay, the location. All right, location of your facility. There's all kinds of factors involved. Geography, climate, noise, economic. Who are our neighbors? What do they do? What impact can they have on our business? We are responsible for what waste products we generate and how we handle them. What do we need to do to maintain an environment that minimizes the risk for contamination of our product? Next, please. Okay. Premises must be located to minimize risks of cross-contamination. For instance, not located next to a malting factory with high airborne levels of yeast. A malting factory would be one that's involved with the use of yeast to either process grains or beverages. So we wouldn't want to put our facility next to another facility that's creating a lot of airborne effluents. Okay, next, please. Okay, the layout of our building should minimize risk of errors. It must make it easy to clean. It must make it easy to maintain, avoiding cross-contamination, and to avoid any adverse effects on quality of our products. Next, please. Okay, 3 principal things when we design our building. How will our material flow from raw materials to finished goods? How will our people flow through the building to make sure they minimize potential for cross-contamination? And how do we create our layout to have an efficient and process flow that also minimizes cross-contamination? Okay, next, please. All right, so this is just a a general example of the kind of schematic you would want to create when you're designing a building. As you see in the upper left-hand corner, you have the incoming goods, and then on your far right, you have finished product going out the door. Each color represents, the green represents the material, the red represents the people, and the blue represents the red, green, and red and green. Okay, and the blue is just the labeling. Okay, next, please. Okay, just as a heads up, when a regulatory agency comes to visit your plant as part of a pre-approval inspection or as part of a routine inspection, one of the things they're very keen on is looking at your material flow and your people flow. So make sure that in all your dossiers for each product that you have something similar to what was on the previous slide, custom tailored for your operation. Your premises must be of suitable design and construction to facilitate sanitation, cleaning. You must have maximum protection against entry of insects, birds, and animals. You must have procedures for rodents and pest controls. Next, please. Okay, the construction of your facility, the bricks and mortar, you must be made out of suitable materials that are not additive, absorptive, or reactive to what's going on within your facility. You must have an ample and a stable electrical supply. You must have suitable lighting to make sure that your operators can have a environment in which they can do adequate and satisfactory visual checks. Temperature and humidity control to maintain an environment that doesn't harm your product, and that you have appropriate and effective ventilation to prevent cross-contamination and to create a safe working environment for your personnel. Okay, next, please. Okay, temperature and relative humidity needs to be controlled and monitored. The requirements need to be laid out in an SOP. All the periodic checks need to be recorded. These documents become part of your permanent records. Okay, next, please. Okay, construction. Keep in mind, you should make your facility to prevent cross-contamination. Make it so that you can have a good, clean operation. Next, please. Okay, design your areas for weighing of your materials. Make sure you have a good air supply, dust control. Make sure everything's cleanable. Make sure there's no hidden corners for dust accumulation, and make sure you have suitable protection for material, for your product, and for your operators. Next, please. Okay, maintenance. You should have written procedures for how your maintenance is performed, how frequently it's done, and your routine checks. Okay, and repairs and maintenance need to be complementary to the product, not adverse to it. Next, please. Okay, what you see here is an operator gowned up in an environment that appears to be suitable for what he or she is doing. Next, please. Okay, premises part 2. Next, please. Okay, areas separate from your manufacturing. You're going to have rest and break areas and refreshment rooms, they need to be kept separate from manufacturing. Your changing areas, your washrooms and your toilets need to be accessible to the operators. You need to have an appropriate number of them, and they need to be separate from your manufacturing operations. Okay, maintenance shops separate from production. If this isn't possible, whatever tools you need to be dedicated and kept in the manufacturing area. Animal houses, if you have animals that are involved in either your laboratories or your manufacturing operations, they need to be kept separate. They need to have a separate air handling and entrance. Animals such as chickens, if you're doing egg-based vaccine manufacturer, or any of the other products that may need some input from animals, whether they be bovine or porcine or whatever. Next, please. Okay, what you see here is a layout illustrating that your factory on your left is separate from your change room, separate from your lavatories, and separate from your canteen or your break rooms. Okay, and right in the center, there's an airlock and so forth. So next, please. Okay, what we see here is the picture on the left has a bench. So the operators would sit on the bench, raise their feet over, put on foot covers, and then enter the distant area with the foot covers on. That's an example of a step over, which is required in certain facilities. On your right, you see an air shower that the operators would go through that would remove, let's say, any dust that might be on their uniforms. Okay, next, please. Okay, this picture shows a loading platform, a loading dock, where a truck would come in, and you see that there are separate doors, separate garage doors for receiving and shipping. You also see a roof over it, which shows that the transfer from the building to the truck is protected from weather. And within this, there's an area, there would be an area to clean incoming materials. Next, please. Okay, here we go. You have a vacuum cleaner, which is used to clean off incoming raw materials, the outside of their containers. You would clean by using a vacuum cleaner, air curtains, air tunnels, and cloths or dusters. Next, please. Okay, storage areas. They need to be large enough, they need to be orderly, and you need to have segregated areas for starting materials, packaging materials, etc. Next, please. Okay, you have an example here on the left of rolling files, rolling shelving units, and that they're labeled on the outside. That allows materials to be segregated and separated. What you see on the right is probably two different shipments. They're physically separated by a space in the middle. You see copious labeling on them, and you see a yellow sticker that probably is indicative that the materials have been sampled and that they're in process of being tested. A green label would probably, just by convention, would probably indicate they're approved for use. Red label would probably indicate that they're quarantined or rejected. Okay, next one, next slide, please. Okay, there you have more pictures of segregation. You see appropriate labeling. You see on the very top of the left picture, you see some kind of shipping manifest or label. On the right, you see equipment, probably cleaned equipment, or maybe even equipment that's in use, but it's segregated. And each particular vessel you see has a white label on it indicating what it's being used for and or its status. Next, please. Okay, storage areas need to be appropriate with temperature, relative humidity. They need to be clean, dry. They need to have appropriate lighting, and they need to be adequately sized for the activity being performed. Next, please. Okay, you need to have a separate quarantine area, which is marked and access to it restricted. You need to have a separate sampling area where there's no risk for contamination of the sample. And the next bullet point says segregated areas for rejected, recalled, and returned materials. And you also need to have safe and secure areas for hazardous materials, radioactive materials, narcotics, so forth. In some facilities, they are unable to have separate buildings, but they have spatial segregation, and they have fencing that clearly marks out the areas. Next, please. Okay, what you see here is a quarantined area that it's quite apparent that there's some issue with this material, as you can see from the chain and the quarantine placard and the labeling. On the right, you'll see a drum that's clearly marked. You'll see, if you look closely, you'll see it had a green label. The green label is got an X through it, and it shows that it's been rejected. So you don't want to remove labels. You just want to mark them up so that you know what's going on. Next, please. Okay, your printed materials, your primary labels, your primary cartoning, your primary bottles, they need to be kept in an area that segregates them, that shows their status, that has enough segregation to prevent mix-ups. And they also need to be stored in areas with temperature and humidity controls appropriate for the materials of the package. Next, please. Okay, weighing areas need to be kept separate. They need to have dust control. They need to have easy to clean finishes, and you need to document all of the activities within this area. Next, please. Okay, these pictures pretty much just show how you have separate areas for the material and the operator, the man and the material. Here, the operator is between two areas for material. Okay, next, please. Okay, your production areas need to be designed to minimize your risk of contamination. If appropriate, they would need to be dedicated. If you're making penicillins or certain biological preparations, certain steroidal materials or cytotoxics also need to be separated. if your particular factory is making non-pharmaceuticals on the same footprint, they can't be in the same building. Okay. For instance, pesticides and herbicides, they can't be. Next, please. Okay. Ideally, you want to lay out your production facility with the sequence of production. You don't want to be starting one place and crisscrossing. You need to have appropriate cleanliness. You need to have adequate work and storage space. Okay, ideally, and you need to have your layout to avoid mix-ups and cross-contaminations. Next, please. Okay, this is pretty much a repeat of what was said earlier. And as I mentioned, these slides will be available from Melissa after the presentation is over. Send her an email requesting them if you wish. Next, please. Okay, all your mechanical stuff needs to take into consideration what's being done in the area. You want to have your pipe work and your light fittings and your ventilation points with no recesses that are difficult to clean. Your drains must be of adequate size and equipped to prevent backflow. You don't want to have open channels or troughs that your effluents are running into. Next, please. Okay, these are just some photographs of some design elements where you have some things covered to prevent dust accumulation. Next, please. Okay, adequate ventilation, temperature control, humidity control. Next, please. Okay, quality control labs, you want them separate from production areas. You want separate areas for biotesting, micro testing, and if you do anything with radioactive materials, that has to be separate. And this is something you'll see in all the slides. Suitable design with sufficient space to avoid mix-ups. Next, please. Okay, here's some examples of storage. You see everything's properly labeled. Next, please. Okay, quality control areas need to be separate rooms, suitable construction materials. Next, please.
That was
Okay.
the last slide, yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Praissman, for your very insightful presentation. This is a critical time for us in Africa. As you know, through the African CDC, the continent is working on expanding vaccine manufacturing capacity and capabilities. So there are a couple of questions here for you, which I'm going to read out. And if you have any question, please type in the chat room. We'll read it to him and he will address them. But what role, do you think you can play in this laudable initiative that is ongoing on the continent of Africa? How do you think you can contribute to what is going on in terms of expanding vaccine manufacturing capability?
I have to unmute, sorry. Me personally, was that the question? What role I can play?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly can offer my experience in GMP matters and also guidance in design and construction and startup of facilities. By no stretch am I an expert in vaccine manufacture. I have been involved in vaccine manufacture, so I know the general principles of how you make vaccines, but for the most part, every GMP activity carries over into every product. So there's more similarities than differences. So I could assist in this matter of helping to design and start up facilities and train people.
Okay, great. So I
Yeah.
have a couple of questions here. The first one is from Samson. He said the term GMP seems peculiar to US FDA. In other jurisdictions, it is simply GMP. Any rationale for this, please?
No, other than what I've been told is that just having the C in front of it means that it's a living process and it's constantly evolving and subject to improvements and additions.
Okay. Then second question is also from Samson. He said, generally speaking, for how long do you advise that outdated label should be be retained before destruction?
Normally what I've seen is that you have, it definitely has to be kept in archives for as long as the product is within its expiration. And normally I've seen 2 to 5 years after.
Okay. Then the next question is what subpart of 21 CFR Part 210 and 211 speaks directly to the concept of quality risk management as presented by ICH Q9?
There is no specific reference in 210 and 211 that talks to that. But industry standard has been to incorporate ICH into their operations. European and Asian and Africa regulatory agencies make specific mention of ICH, but US does not. But US-based companies do incorporate it into their operation.
Okay. So the next question, is it generally acceptable to manufacture cephalosporins in the same factory with penicillins, or both have to be separate, dedicated factories?
Oh, that's a that's a hot button. It kind of depends on the what your specific regulatory agencies call for. Penicillins definitely have to be kept separate. Cephalosporins, I have seen manufactured in separate facilities, but I've also seen them manufactured in the same building with separate air handling and with some kind of walls and so forth that prevent them from crisscrossings from being mixed up. That would have to be discussed with each individual regulatory agency. A lot of companies, out of an abundance of caution, keep them completely separate.
Okay, great. So this.
Sorry, that wasn't a clear answer.
Yeah, that's fine. The next question is from Adeshanya. How can I have access to the presentation material from the presenter? Of course, that will be emailed to you after the presentation. The next question is from Kudus. Should one want to go into veterinary and human vaccine manufacturing apart from adopting isolation restrictions on same site? What other measures should one be mindful of? For example, fill and finish.
For example, I couldn't hear the last.
Fill and finish.
Fill and finish. It would depend on most veterinary products are conservatively manufactured separately. Some veterinary products use common materials as human products, and they're manufactured in the same facility. It would be a case-by-case basis.
Okay. I think the general thing now is the use of single-use bags for manufacturing. And as we know, there's shortage of materials now. So what would be your advice for Africa? What are the advantages and disadvantages of the single-use and then the stainless steel
Right.
technologies?
Well, the advantage is that there's no cleaning. With single-use bags, you would just use it and then discard it or recycle it or however you're going to process it. So you wouldn't have to perform cleaning validation, and the risk of cross-contamination is minimized. But in light of the fact that single-use bags are extremely expensive, you would have to do a cost-benefit analysis versus the cleaning procedures, the cleaning validation versus the cost of the bag. If, however, the bags are not available, then it becomes a different scenario. Then it just goes back to prior to the bags, and you would just be manufacturing it in the stainless steel, and you'd have to perform the cleaning procedures and the cleaning validations.
Great. So the next question is from Samson again. With the current thinking about continuous manufacturing, what would be your prescription for African manufacturers?
As far as whether you should do it or not, is that where the thinking is? Continuous manufacturing can be a valuable technology, but there again, if the need for large volumes doesn't exist, then continuous manufacturing is not effective cost-wise. You know, it's a cost-benefit thing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking time to talk to us.
My pleasure.
At this critical time of expanding vaccine manufacturing on the continent. I believe a lot of manufacturers are intending manufacturers. We want to establish a kind of bilateral discussion with you. So we encourage the manufacturers and then manufacturers to contact the Secretariat. Melissa will put you in direct contact with Mr. Praissman. So thank you very much. Thank you, Melissa, for putting this together. And then the presentation will be sent to all the people that registered for this webinar. So we look forward again to welcoming you in the next 2 weeks with a new topic as we continue this series of webinars. Thank you very much.
Okay.